Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into the crisis of trust that's swallowing one of crypto's most talked about projects, Pi Network. And it all centers around a shocking $20 million scandal that has shaken it to its very core. So let's just dive right in. Pi Network. Was this a revolution in the making? Or was it destined for ruin? I mean, this was a project with millions and millions of users. It promised to be the next big thing. So how on earth did it find itself at the center of a massive controversy that's now threatening its very existence? That's what we're going to investigate. And this isn't just about the price of a coin going up and down. That happens all the time in crypto. No, this is much deeper. We're talking about a fundamental breakdown of faith, a conflict between the project's own leaders that just spiraled out of control and left its entire community feeling completely betrayed. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We'll start with how that crisis of trust even began. Then we'll get into the bombshell $20 million revelation. After that, we'll look at the devastating fallout. And finally, we'll ask the big question, what does the future even hold for Pi?
So how did we get to this point? The story doesn't start with a tech failure or some big market crash. Nope. It all began behind the scenes with a really personal conflict that just exploded between the project's own founders.
And this right here, this brings us to the key. If you want to understand this whole crisis, you have to understand one thing, a lawsuit from 2020. And get this, it wasn't filed by some angry investor. It was filed by Vincent McPhillip, one of Pi Network's very own co-founders, against his partners. Now, when you look at the timeline, it's pretty clear this thing was simmering under the surface for a long, long time. The project raises $20 million in 2019, but then, just a year later, that lawsuit gets filed. The wild part is, all the juicy details stayed hidden from the public for years while the case was grinding through the courts. It finally got settled in 2023. So what was actually in those court documents? Well, the allegations were just explosive. We're talking claims that the $20 million in funding was being misused, descriptions of a toxic work environment where marital problems were leading to shouting matches and even physical fights, and, to top it all off, an alleged scheme to push out one of the co-founders by basically making his shares worthless. This quote from a popular community member, Mr. Spock, just perfectly captures that feeling of betrayal. He's basically saying, hey, that money was supposed to build our dream. We thought it was for hundreds of apps, for a whole ecosystem. But instead, it just felt like it was hidden away and, well, allegedly misused. So let's connect the dots here, because that internal fight did not stay behind closed doors. The second those details came out, it triggered a chain reaction, a cascade of devastating real-world consequences for the project, for its currency, and for its millions of users. The first and most brutal hit was the price. As all these stories about the infighting and mismanagement came out, confidence just completely evaporated. And the value of the Pi coin, it collapsed by a staggering 80 to 85%. Just gone. The financial damage was just immense. The project fell right out of the top 50 cryptocurrencies for the first time ever. The price went from its peak all the way down to about 25 cents, wiping out billions, that's billions with a B, of dollars in market cap along the way. But it wasn't just the outside investors who lost faith. The damage was coming from inside the house. A pretty shocking survey showed that 50%, half, of the project's own holders, the true believers, now think the whole thing is going to collapse by 2026. In the wider crypto world, the project's reputation was just left in tatters. You had the CEO of the huge exchange Bybit publicly calling it a scam. Then in 2023, authorities in China straight up labeled it a pyramid scheme. The warnings were everywhere, with some experts saying there was a 90% risk of loss for anyone investing. And this slide, wow, this really puts it all into perspective. The gap here is just staggering. On one side, you have the community's dream, the global consensus value, where they're hoping for a price over $314,000. And on the other side, the harsh reality of the market, about a quarter. That gap says everything you need to know about the loss of credibility. So all of this leads us to the most important question of all. After all this damage, can Pi Network even survive? And to answer that, we really have to look at the structure of the network itself. The whole promise of crypto is decentralization, right? Power in the hands of the many, not the few. But despite all its promises, when you look under the hood of Pi Network, you find a very, very different reality. And honestly, it is a huge red flag for its future.
And here is the number that defines that reality. Out of a total supply of 100 billion Pi tokens, over 93 billion of them are reportedly controlled directly by the core team. Just let that sink in. That is a shocking level of centralization. It gives a tiny group of people almost complete control over the entire network.
And this centralized control has real-world consequences. It means all the mainnet nodes, the computers that actually run the network, are controlled by the leadership. It's a huge reason why major exchanges like Binance or Coinbase have stayed away. And crucially, it means that even after launching, the network still doesn't have any significant real-world use.
So, after all that, what do the experts think? Well, they're completely split. It is a 50-50 toss-up.